So it begins, the Triduum, yes? A great service that commemorates the passion, death, and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. It is a single celebration that lasts 3 days. Tonight, Maundy Thursday, is the night when the church commemorates the institution of the Last Supper. This is also the night, as you just heard, that Jesus washes the feet of his disciples and gives us all, gives his disciple and us all, the new commandment that we are to love one another as he loves us. Tomorrow is Good Friday, the day when we commemorate the passion and death of Jesus. And finally, on Saturday, we have several opportunities, right, to engage with the Easter narrative. First, in the morning at 9, when we will gather to hear about Jesus in the tomb. We will then have Molly Ferguson's funeral on Saturday. And finally, gather that evening for the great vigil of Easter, where we will celebrate the resurrection of our Lord in the first liturgy of Easter Day. Celebration this evening, though, is marked not only by word and sacrament, but I think it truly seeks to emphasize the primacy of community in our lives. This community, us. Its fragility and its blessedness. And it does this through intimacy, right? There will be a moment when we will all be up here washing each other's feet. For some, that's a boundary that gets crossed tonight, and it's an intimate one. It does this through intimacy, mutual forgiveness, absolution, reconciliation with each other, peace, and as a sign and as a duty to be in service to one another. These are the fundamental characteristics of who we are and what we are to be about as followers of Jesus. Indeed, tonight is about a love that overwhelms us. I think it's meant to be felt very deeply. I can't count on how many occasions I have watched as people have done this very vulnerable task for one another and been overcome and then hug the person that has provided that service to them. And so it's meant to be felt deeply in the very depth of our hearts with a kind of poignancy that crystallizes or should crystallize our own intent, not only to love one another, but to go out and to love those to whom no love is shown. While death does find itself at the center of the Triduum tomorrow, resurrection finds itself always at the heart of the Paschal mystery too. But before we get there, let us not forget the betrayal that lies at its threshold. For that is this night too. For if we remember, even Judas ate dinner with Jesus tonight. And it is this night that Jesus will be betrayed by him. And over the next few days, we will learn a lot about death and ultimately resurrection and how they are linked forever in Jesus, and are themselves the pattern by which that betrayal is ultimately absorbed And then through grace, the way that the power that will ultimately conquer death becomes channeled. We are to see this, I think, never forgetting that it was love incarnate that was betrayed and then crucified on the cross. For tonight, after bread is broken, feet are washed, and our most ardent prayers are offered, Jesus' fate is sealed with a kiss. Sealed, as it were, in the name of love. Perhaps knowing all of that makes tonight a little complicated for us. Or maybe not. Maybe you've heard the story a time or two. Perhaps then at the root, or at the heart of what we do for one another this evening, is really about our engagement with our own fragility, our own vulnerability before a God that loves us nonetheless. And the way we honor that, the way that we model that love, that unconditional love, and through practice and thanksgiving, for giving to us that great love, is by taking foot in hand and washing it as he did. And for some of us, this kind of love is unknown. It's not something that we do every day. I mean, we wash our own feet every day, probably, I hope so, but maybe not each other's. It's a kind of love and it's a kind of action that, if you think about it, sometimes will make you blush. And it should. It made Peter blush. Lord, you will never wash my feet. But he did. I felt like Peter before. I think maybe you have too. Repelled at times and embarrassed by such love and openness, especially when I have experienced the kind of love that seeks nothing in return. To that end, I've often wondered why we've never considered this act of Jesus, this humble act of service. I've wondered why we've never considered this a miracle. Because isn't it one? Surely this kind of love that Jesus shows us on the night before he dies goes beyond just an example of selfless service we are to emulate. Isn't being fully seen by someone, seen for who we are, all our warts, everything that is dark about us laid bare, isn't being seen for who we are and then loved anyways? Isn't that one of the most deepest human offerings one can experience? Isn't such an encounter one that ultimately borders on the miraculous? I think so, especially if you consider that Jesus washed Judas's feet too. We are called to love like that. Jesus says that in doing so, people will know that we are his disciples. Nevertheless, that call is not just to serve and humble ourselves before those we love, just before us tonight. For what good is it to love those who love you? Even sinners do the same. No, make no mistake about tonight. The love with which we are to love others, that is galvanized here with each other. We are to see that love in each other and recognize it, so that at supper with friends, we can go away from this place and take in wherever the Lord will lead us and give ourselves away in service to the freedom of all. And we are to do this even to those whom we call our enemy, even to those who would betray us. But at times when that happens, we will know that rendering such love demands that we will encounter the cross. We are to love anyways. And there upon that threshold, when grace is demanded of you like that, you will encounter the heart of the gospel. For there you will encounter grace and perhaps become ministers of it, and will in some way know the cost of love. For no one really knows the meaning of grace until it is demanded of them. And in such a realization, I hope that all of us will be drawn back together to this night, continually being drawn back to this night, and in so doing, allow ourselves to hear the message again, as much as we need to hear it, that I give you a new commandment, that you are to love one another as I have loved you. If you do this, everyone will know that you are my disciple.